we were able to change gene expression towards something more youthful. So our participants actually got over 3 years younger. Building our intervention brick by brick for DNA methylation, we did much better as compared to the Mediterranean diet on bioage reversal. So it's not just disease preventing. It's not just protecting us from cancer and heart disease, diabetes, etc. It's tacking years on.
Kara, I think a good jumping off point for our conversation, because you are such an expert in this topic, actually, come to think of it, you know more about this than anybody else I know. Methylation. And this is a topic that I've, over the years, understood to a point, but I still feel like it is very nuanced, very intricate, and, there's more learning I can do in that realm as well. So what I'm getting at here, to kick off, let's talk about what methylation is and why it matters in a really general sense so we can all be on the same page.
Yeah, methylation is something that's happening really in almost every cell in the body all of the time, just all of the time. I mean, I liken it, this isn't an accurate comparison, but I think for the layperson, it packs a punch in that it's as fundamental as breathing. I mean, imagine for a moment, obviously, if you're not breathing, you're going to feel that, in quick order and not survive ultimately if you can't. Methylation is the same. I mean, we cannot survive without this very fundamental process. In fact, if it's not happening optimally, we're just simply not born. Or there's certain, there are birth defects like spina bifida and so forth that can be associated with imbalances to a certain aspect of methylation. So it's just like incredibly far-reaching. What it is going back to high school biochemistry, a methyl group is just a carbon, a simple carbon atom with 3 hydrogens. It's like one of the most fundamental, molecular compound in the body. And we make this carbon with 3 hydrogens in something called the methylation cycle. We do it, predominantly in the liver, but we definitely do it in a lot of other places in the body. And the methylation cycle, if anybody knows the word methylation, probably they've heard something about the methylation cycle, because in order for us to make this carbon with 3 hydrogens, it's a nutrient-intensive process. And this is where we need our folate and our B12. So those 2 nutrients are essential for life, very important for health. And they are working right here, making this carbon with 3 hydrogens in a form that's usable in the body. So the carbon and 3 hydrogens are stuck onto a larger compound called S-adenosyl methionine being that methyl group. And we make this in the methylation cycle using B12 and folate and other important nutrients like choline, betaine. Minerals involved include magnesium, zinc, potassium. And so we make this S-adenosyl methionine all of the time. And there are hundreds of enzymes or proteins in the body. They're called methyltransferases, and they do exactly what the name implies. They transfer that methyl group onto another molecular compound. So all over, hundreds of different compounds. And when we put the methyl group onto or take the methyl group off of a structure, it changes the behavior. So we make adrenaline, our get up and go, the energy that will help us flee a tiger or fight a tiger or whatever, fight or flight. We make adrenaline using methylation, and then we turn adrenaline off. We don't keep adrenaline hanging around in our body it's only around for seconds, maybe a minute and a half at the most. So we turn it off by adding a methyl group back onto the structure. So we make and metabolize it both using methylation. We make dopamine, this all-important feel-good neurotransmitter that's essential, for motor movement, for memory, for feeling good, for a variety of emotional experiences. We make it, again, using methylation, and we also metabolize it with methylation. Estrogens, we move estrogens out of the body. We make other neurotransmitters, like something called acetylcholine that's essential for memory, again, in muscle, also similar to dopamine. So all over the body, we're using this carbon and 3 hydrogens to make or break down compounds. And then we're also, in my area of research, is thinking about methylation on our DNA. putting methyl groups onto DNA and also taking them off in something called demethylation is one of the most important ways we regulate which genes are on and which genes are off. So let me just take a second there and see if you have any questions for me.
No, I just want to get into the DNA methylation part, which is going to be the biggest part of what we're going to get into for our purposes today. And I'll just drop this analogy and you can riff on that. In your book, you talk about it being like the hardware of a computer and the software, the DNA being like the hardware, and then the methylation being like the software interacting with that DNA. So I'll have you take that and expand upon it.
Yeah. So, DNA is inert unless there's some action happening on it. So it's our hardware. Like you're not unless you've got your Windows or the Apple equivalent or your Google or your Chrome. Your computer is really pretty useless, right? Unless you have your software package, all your various software packages, similar to DNA. So DNA is not doing a heck of a lot unless we have the information to, turn on the genes that we want. And this is, again, it's extraordinarily fundamental. I mean, the way that we make our cells. So during embryogenesis, when we're building a life, it's methylation that is going to turn the correct genes on for a liver cell or for a heart cell or a brain cell or a skin cell or an eye cell. Those are different methylation patterns that are going to enable that cell to have that particular action to create that particular organ. So those are methylation patterns. This is the field of epigenetics. Let me just step back and say that. Epi above genetics, the genes. So the biochemical marks, if you will, that influence which genes are on and which genes are off. And there's many of them, and it's a complicated science. But one of the standouts, one of the most important of all of our various epigenetic marks is DNA methylation. So again, we build out a life with very active methylation and very active demethylation. And this is going back to what I was talking about earlier, one of the reasons why folate, and also B12 are so important during pregnancy, because we need this system to be functioning optimally. But, once we're built, a human is born or moving on, through the life, we use DNA methylation to determine which genes are on and which genes are off. And it is influenced by how we're living. It's influenced by what we're eating, whether we're moving our bodies. It's influenced by our exposure to toxins, our emotional well-being, our community, our experience of life. And that which we're putting in our body, something we call in the scientific community the exposome, is going to influence what genes are on and what genes are off. So there's a continuum of expression. On one hand, your liver cell is never going to change methylation and become, a brain cell. Like those are resilient and lasting epigenetic marks. They're not changing. But after that, we've got a lot of say over, whether we're turning on, the best genes possible or not. And I want to say additionally, because this is kind of a cool point, if we're preconception, so if we're going to have kids later on, some of this information, some of our real-time choices will actually be handed down to our offspring. And so we've inherited some from previous generations, and we're also passing some of our habits down.
Okay, to make sure I understand where we're at here with this. So we have DNA methylation, and what this is taking a methyl group and putting that above the DNA, epigenetics,
Yep.
and that's going to influence how that DNA, which is the hardware, functions.
Yes, that's right.
You mentioned B12 and folate a couple times, and you talked about how we can have an influence over this. So let's start with B12 and folate and talk about where that influence comes in within DNA methylation, and then talk about how we make sure we're getting enough of those nutrients to support that.
Yeah. So B12 and folate go back to making the methyl group, making that carbon with 3 hydrogens. We're doing that in something called the methylation cycle, and the methylation cycle is whirring all the time. It's always on and happening. And we make that all-important methyl group using B12 and folate. I mean, we use them for other reasons. We use folate actually to repair DNA. Folate plays a variety of different roles in regulating gene expression, but in terms of DNA methylation, turning genes on and off using methyl groups, that's the methylation cycle where folate does a lot of heavy lifting.
And just to get into the weeds here for a second, are they just part of that cycle allowing different foods that we're eating to be converted to the methyl groups, or are they actually part of that methyl group?
They're essential to the build of that methyl group. Yeah, they're essential for the build.
So it's
of
an
that
interaction with those and the nutrition we're taking in to build the methyl group.
Well, we're gonna liberate the B12 and the folate from our food, and then they're going to go on and work their magic in helping make methyl groups. So it's definitely, we ingest the foods, the nutrients are liberated, and then they go about their work in the body. And for folate and B12, a fundamental piece of work that they both do is making methyl groups.
Got it. Okay, while we're on the topic of folate, let's differentiate between folate and folic acid. Folate being something we can get through food or supplementation, folic acid being a synthetic from supplementation, certain forms.
Yes. So I mean, we in this country, and I think in Canada as well, you have a food fortification program where folic acid is required by law to be added to flours and other compounds. Do you guys have a food fortification program? I should know that.
I believe so. I should know that as well. It's not, I don't need a lot of fortified foods. I avoid them if I can, but I do believe that they're in some of them. Yes.
Yeah. And there are, many countries around the world that require folic acid to be added to foods. And it's an important reason for label reading, because you'll see that, generally poorer quality nutrients are added to many foods, and even foods that we consider high quality, like vegan milks, nut milks, and so forth. You can see a lot of nutrients are added, and you have to be careful if you don't want those, or you have to pay attention to how much you're ingesting. But folic acid is often, if not always, among those, especially in the United States. So yeah, it's a synthetic compound, and the reason they landed on folic acid when they started the fortification program is that it's very, very, very shelf stable. It's not going to break down. It's like a fully oxidized folate, but your body has to activate it, and it's a pretty effort intensive process to activate it. Most of us can. Some of us do not activate folic acid very, very efficiently, and if we don't, the folic acid can wreak havoc for some of us. It can actually be incredibly negative for some of us. It's not negative for all of us. And I do want to acknowledge that the food fortification program did reduce the incidence of birth defects in this country. So it's so ubiquitous that insufficient folate is consumed. They started this to slow down the rate of birth defects, and they were successful. However, there's fallout with using the synthetic form, and we can, get natural folates in our foods, and we can also purchase bioidentical folates in vitamins now. And so I think it's really worth the extra, the modest additional spend to get those natural forms for sure.
So for somebody who can take folic acid and utilize that in the body, it sounds like it's different depending on the person's genetics. But for somebody who can, how does that interact with folate that's taken in through a quality supplement or in food? So what I'm getting at here is, if you have both of them coming in and you're getting some of the good stuff and then some of the synthetic, does the synthetic block some of the folate being utilized by the body?
Well, there is an autoimmune condition called cerebral folate deficiency, which could be negatively influenced by actually folic acid is toxic to these individuals, quite frankly. I mean, and the natural folates that need to cross the blood-brain barrier are unable to do so because the folic acid can block. But that's not the case. That's not the case for the vast majority of us. So I don't want people to get too anxious about folic acid. And I want to acknowledge that it did actually do have some benefit, but there are countries in real time now considering ending folic acid fortification or not starting it because of some of these issues. And there may even be, what I talk about in the book, folic acid or folate overload, too much. Most nutrients exist in a U curve. Insufficient amounts are very problematic, as is the case with folate, and we can talk about some of them, certainly birth defects being one, faulty methylation being another, and excess folates, regardless of the type, natural or synthetic, can also be toxic. And one of the potentials is an increased risk for some cancer. I don't want to be an alarmist and create a lot of anxiety, but excess folates may alter DNA expression in such a way that will allow, in certain vulnerable populations, probably those among us who are older, to have a cancer promoting effect. So there are some studies that suggest that, and I do publish them. So excess, insufficient, and excess, we want to avoid. And I think as a rule, so if you're eating a lot of fortified grain, if you're consuming a lot of fortified nut milks, if you're also taking a multivitamin, and then you're eating as much of a folate dense diet in the forms of lots of greens and nuts and seeds and mushrooms, etc., and animal product like liver or whatever, you can consume a ton of folate. You can consume an excess amount of folate. I see in my practice most commonly people with folate overload it's the synthetic form, and it's because they're vegan or vegetarian, and they're doing these fortified nut milks, and they're doing grains, fortified grains, etc. I mean, it just adds up. And then they're on top of that, especially if you're vegan or vegetarian, you're worried about some of those micronutrients you might miss. So on top of that, you layer on a multivitamin mineral, and you're going to get to excess really quickly. And an area actually particularly concerning for me is during pregnancy. So we do need more folate during pregnancy, but we don't want to go overboard.
Okay, so that's good. We went deep into there. I wanted to talk about the excess folate, and you got into the weeds, which is great. I just want to clarify one thing before we leave that part. So if somebody's consuming, they're not having any synthetic supplements, they're not having any fortified foods, but they're just getting, folate through whole food sources, the greens, the mushrooms.
Yeah.
You mentioned, I think, animal sources, and you gave a whole bunch of examples there. Do we have to worry about overdoing it if we're just sticking to whole foods? I didn't think so. I wanted to clarify that, though.
Yeah, don't have to worry about it. No, in fact, that's, I think it's amazing. And yeah, we can do a really good job supporting healthy methylation with diet alone. And then if we need to layer on a nutrient after that, if we need to layer on a little bit of B12 or folate after that, or do them together, we certainly can, but we can go for much lower amounts because we're just getting it all from our diet. And in many, many cases, we just simply don't need to.
Well, let's zoom out a little bit here. We went deep into the folate, but let's talk about nutrition in general. So when we want to make sure through whole foods we're supporting methylation properly, what does that look like?
So you want, again, I can talk about some of our superfoods. In our research, and we'll get to this, I should just actually snapshot our research because it's kind of exciting. We looked at a methylation intensive diet. We looked at a diet and lifestyle program that optimizes methylation, and especially DNA methylation. My research focus is on making sure as we age, we are turning the genes on that we want on, we are turning off the genes off that we don't want on, and then we're living long and healthy. So in our study, using this DNA methylation program, we were able to change gene expression towards something more youthful. So our participants actually got over 3 years younger. So that's the excitement about DNA methylation, is that we actually showed using a diet and lifestyle program, you could reverse BioH. So what does that diet actually look like? Yes, it's got to be dense in methyl-donor nutrients. We call it an epinutrient because it changes epigenetics, changes gene expression, and a methyl-donor-rich diet is essential. And then there's also something called methylation adaptogens. Again, very important epinutrients that we'll talk about in a second. But the methyl donors and the way that and where we get them, if you are not a vegetarian or vegan, liver is a methyl donor superfood. I cannot tell a lie. If you're open to eating liver, it's packed with a day's requirement of folate, of B12, another really important methyl donor called choline. It's also got a whole host of beautiful minerals. It's a multivitamin in a food matrix. But you don't have to eat it. I take mine in caps. I'm not good at cooking liver, so but it's so important that I just take it encapsulated. Greens, as you alluded to earlier, just dark leafy greens, essential. Another superstar in my program are mushrooms. Maitake, shiitake, enoki, packed with choline. They're packed with all sorts of really, brilliant nutrients. But when we look at it from an epinutrient lens, they've got loads of choline, they've got folate. They just have a beautiful complement of really important epinutrients. Where else? Seeds, nuts, again, dense with epinutrients. Eggs, choline is a methyl donor, so it will support B12 and folate. Beets have something called betaine in them, and betaine is also an all-important methyl donor, again, active in that methylation cycle that I've been mentioning. So those are some of our, all-important methyl donor foods that we, used in our study and use in our clinical practice here.
So far methyl donors, we've gone over folate, B12, choline, and betaine?
Betaine, yep.
Betaine. So is there any others I'm forgetting that we've talked about?
There are secondary nutrients that play a role in the folate cycle, the methylation cycle. Those are the heavy lifters. Secondary nutrients are the minerals that are involved. So potassium, magnesium, zinc, and then DHA, from fish oil, can help kind of stimulate or upregulate methylation cycle. So DHA plays a role. There's some other B vitamins, riboflavin, niacin, that have an influence. B6 plays a role. So there's these primary heavy lifting nutrients, and then there's there's a plethora of secondary nutrients. It's dense. And then from animal protein, the all important amino acid methionine is fundamental to the methylation cycle as well.
Okay, just to simplify now in a practical sense, we've talked about a lot of different chemicals and different foods that you can get them in, and things like liver and beets, things people might not be eating on a regular basis. To give people a comprehensive plan to make sure they're supporting methylation, what would they want to get in within a week to get all these different nutrients?
That's a great question. So we have targets that we set, daily in our study. So if you want to actually achieve what we achieved in the study, so if you're looking for a longevity program and you want to do, you want the promise of biological age reversal, you pin our program to your fridge, you plan at the grocery store, you're going to be doing more greens than you're used to, and perhaps a little more cruciferous than you're used to, but it's very doable. We're shooting for about 7 cups of veg per day. Some of those will be greens, leafy greens, kale, spinach, chard, whatever's in the grocery store that looks beautiful. Beet greens, if you're buying your beets, colorful veggies. Again, whatever looks beautiful. Those colorful polyphenols are in the category of methylation adaptogens, so important epinutrients for a different reason. Cruciferous are just wildly important. So you want to be getting some broccoli. Again, kale is a cruciferous. You can do collards, Brussels sprouts, whatever suits your fancy on that given day. So you want to be thinking about getting this collection of vegetables into your body every day in whatever way that works. I tend to do a big salad or a big stir fry, and I'll bring, my largest meal is lunch. And so I'll just bring a lot of my epi-nutrients, a lot of our requirements just into my office and, nosh on that throughout the day and get most of them. We want people to try to have one beet per day. There's beet powder that you can access, which is fine. Eggs is a weekly commitment. You don't have to have eggs every day, but if you have 5 to 10 eggs per week, which is pretty easy, you have a couple of egg-based breakfasts or meals, then you're done with your egg requirement. Liver is so nutrient dense that you do not have to have it every day. You just have a few servings over the course of the week. And again, I do it. It's easy for me to just do it as a caps. I mean, I can get here some clean sourced liverwurst that I happen to like, or pate. I can get it sometimes. And so I might eat that because I like that. We want people to be having green tea. We want people to be using spices such as turmeric to get the curcumin. And there's a handful of other requirements, but those are the nuts and bolts of what we want people to achieve in a daily basis.
Got it. And you've touched on the adaptogens. Let's talk about specifically how they fit into this.
Yeah. So methylation is incredibly important across our life. Pregnancy is massive and huge, as we spoke about. But as we age, we become less efficient at methylating. And for that reason, we need all of the methyl donors. We need that methylation cycle functioning at top capacity. But here's the thing. As we age, we start to turn off genes that we want on, and we start to turn on genes that we want off. There's sort of this predictable breakdown that happens in gene expression that makes us vulnerable to the diseases of aging. So aging is the biggest risk factor for cancer, for diabetes, for dementia, for cardiovascular diseases. Aging is the biggest risk factor. And a piece of that is that the methylation that's happening on our DNA really becomes kind of out of step. It becomes imbalanced in a very predictable way. So we want methyl donors. We want to keep methylation happening, but we also need these other nutrients that direct traffic. They direct where the methyl donors are going. So I just want to say this is so incredibly important. As we age, two things happen. We have less methyl donors, so we methylate less efficiently, but we put those methyl groups onto genes we don't want them on, and we take them off of genes we want them on. So it becomes wonky, to use a scientific term. It becomes imbalanced. So we need methyl donors to make sure we have supply, but then we really need to direct where it's happening. And these, I think, are the role of the methylation adaptogens. Actually, exercise, sleep, and some of the lifestyle pieces are as important. But these methylation adaptogens seem to really make a difference in where methylation is happening in the body. Classically, I'll give you, and actually, let me just define those. So what are the methylation adaptogens? Those are the colorful fruits and veg, the berries, the peppers, the cruciferous vegetables, green tea, all of our spices, the beautiful spice collection. Most of those are really densely bioactive at the level of gene expression. They're methyl adaptogen extraordinaires. There are many, many methylation adaptogens. One of the coolest things about Younger You, this book, is there's a 30-page epi-nutrient appendix on where you can find these adaptogens, actually where you can find the methyl-donor category of nutrients and the methylation adaptogens. And I can assure people that you're eating a lot of them already, and it's not a heavy lift for you to bring more in your diet. In fact, it's not a heavy lift to have every single forkful of information, every single forkful of food be packed brick by brick with these all important epi-nutrients. So as we age, one of the classic things that happens is that tumor suppressor genes that keep cancer at bay in our body, are turned off. They're actually turned off as we age. We hypermethylate them and shut them down. When a gene is heavily methylated, it can't be transcribed. So that information from that gene is not accessible to the body. We don't benefit from that gene. Hypermethylation of tumor suppressor genes is a common phenomenon as we age. And these the methylation adaptogens, the bulk of the research on them lies in their ability to turn these tumor suppressor genes on, just again through ingesting them as food, we can turn these genes back on and they can go about protecting us from cancer. Extremely important. But we see this with many, many different genes. As we age, our pro-inflammatory genes get turned on. The genes that quench inflammation are inhibited. It's an interesting phenomenon, and it happens in such a predictable way as we age that there are scientists out there who are really pretty heavily debating right now whether aging isn't a programmed phenomena. Kind of a separate conversation, but it's interesting.
To highlight what you just went over there, so we have our methyl donors. We want to make sure nutrition is supporting those. Mm-hmm. And then we have our methylation adaptogens, which seem like they're more important as we age, so we can control how methylation works. We have the donors there, but we need to make sure things aren't quote unquote wonky.
Yes.
Do I have that right?
Yes. So the methyl donors are essential. We get less of them as we age. We need to keep them robust. The methylation adaptogens direct where these guys are going. So they're happening. So gene expression is happening as optimally as possible. I would say that we need to be eating these epinutrients, the donors and adaptogens, throughout the lifespan. So I wouldn't isolate it just to aging. Gene expression gets wonky as we age, but we're engaged in gene expression throughout the lifespan. Really vital times include, during, in utero, pregnancy, early infancy, and then the aging journey. But even, there's really even interesting research on pre-puberty and puberty, young adulthood. So there's no time that eating for your genes isn't important. There really isn't. But as we age, some very predictable breakdown phenomena happen that we can get in the driver's seat and stop, or turn the volume down on.
Okay, so we know we have to eat for DNA methylation. We've talked about folic acid before. Plus, you mentioned either DHA or fish oil, which gets me thinking about supplements. And can we do this with food alone is the question. And if supplements are involved, which ones? And then how do we make sure we're getting enough of those?
Good. Yeah, really good question. So in our research study, the only supplements that we prescribed were a probiotic. So a healthy gut makes a multivitamin. It makes B12, it makes folate. We can make a bunch of this stuff if we tend to our gut. Isn't that amazing? It makes biotin. I mean, there's a whole bunch of nutrients that are produced by a healthy microbiome. So we gave our study participants Lactobacillus plantarum. That is a probiotic that can support production of folate. And then we also gave them a greens powder. So I'm so bullish on these epinutrients that in addition to eating a bunch of veggies per day, I actually gave them extra in a powdered form. And those were the only two supplements that we gave our participants, and we were able to, as I said, change gene expression, change DNA methylation to make them biologically younger. So, we didn't prescribe them anything else. We didn't require them to do anything else. So one could take that on and keep their supplement protocol really quite simple. But I cover actually a lot of supplements in the book. I think most of us aren't eating enough fatty fish, we're not ingesting enough EPA and DHA, and we really need to supplement with it. So within the 8-week time frame of our study, keeping a very simple program is fine. But in daily life, for most of us, unless you are really paying attention to consuming good quality fatty fish, every single day, a supplement is, just a fabulous surrogate. It's something that we can do and that I do and prescribe to everybody. So yeah, fish oil is so important for longevity and health span. The data they're so strong, and the body of research is just always growing. The other thing is vitamin D. Most of us are deficient. Most of us, especially as we head into winter here in New England, people in my population are going to drop, and we don't make vitamin D as efficiently as we did even in, sunny climates and in sunny areas. So vitamin D is an important supplement as well.
So when it came to the diet over this 8 weeks, you mentioned fatty fish. Was that part of the diet on a daily basis or a few times a week, or how did that fit in?
We wanted people to consume, so we didn't require the consumption of fatty fish. It's even though we include salmon as one of our superfoods, we did not require it for daily. It was recommended at least for weekly, and a couple of times per week if possible. But it wasn't a strict requirement for the program.
Okay, so this program, to highlight again, 8 weeks, people aged in reverse, for lack of a better word, over 3 years.
Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about, what the diet would look like to support DNA methylation, but let's talk about when we eat, because I know a piece of this is intermittent fasting.
Very
So how
gentle.
does that fit in?
Yeah, and so I do want to say that I cover so much more in the book that we weren't able to do in our study. So if people are interested in it, do check it out to get details. We did a gentle intermittent fasting structure because we wanted this diet to be attainable for anyone, and so it's just our structure was 12 hours on, 12 hours off. Mildly beneficial. The diet itself is keto leaning, so we don't include, it's a hypoallergenic kind of keto leaning diet. So there's no grain, there are no legumes in the 8 weeks, no beans, no dairy. What else? No alcohol. It's higher in fat. So it nudged people into what we call background ketosis. It's not a frankly ketogenic diet, but we wanted to see, ketones are so potently anti-inflammatory. We wanted people to have some background ketones or a low level of ketones sort of bubbling to exert that anti-inflammatory effect. And ketones themselves, help regulate, influence gene expression. And then helping push that ketogenesis is the intermittent fasting structure. And again, for us, it was just 12 hours on, 12 hours off. Easy to do for most of us. And we could see in our participants, we didn't measure ketones, but we did measure triglycerides, and the triglycerides in our study participants were significantly dropped, suggesting that they were in ketosis. When you're burning fat, ketone is a byproduct. So since their fats dropped significantly, had we measured ketones, we would have likely seen some modest background ketones.
And when it comes to measuring this aging backwards, again, 3+ years, what is done to determine that?
Well, we're looking at DNA methylation. We're looking at patterns of gene expression, and the clock that we used is one of the first biological age clocks out there, and it looks at 353 different methylation sites on the DNA, and we were able to see, as compared to the controls, that our study group rearranged their DNA methylation, rearranged their gene expression towards something more youthful. They did it as compared to the control group, but they also did it as compared to themselves from baseline.
And for somebody tuning in today and they want to adopt some of what we're talking about and maybe have a baseline and then, get some testing done down the line to see their improvements. And if they are aging backwards, are there tests that the public can, sign up for or buy online where they can determine this?
Yeah, so there's two ways you can do it. Actually, you can work with the My Nutrition team, which are, they're experts in our program. They worked with me in the research study. They're one of the key, I think the reason our research study was successful is because the nutritionists met with the study participants every week to make sure, they were able to do what they needed to do. And we're making that available actually to anybody. So you can get a DNA methylation test through us at youngeryouprogram.com and work with a nutritionist for an individualized plan. So that's one way you can do it. You can also, though, if you don't want to, if there is a price, it's $2.99. So it's actually it's so much cheaper than it was when we conducted our study, and this is 2018, so it wasn't a long time ago that we conducted our study. Each test was over $1,000. Each test was over $1,000. So the cost of this has dropped considerably over the years, and it will likely continue to drop. The other thing that you can do if you go to the Younger You program website is that there's a free quiz that we created. And so you could just simply start there and take the quiz and get an idea of your bio age. It's not DNA methylation. I mean, it's not a validated test, but it's a fun way for you to look at your good habits and look at the habits that you can improve.
In your estimation, working with people, how many people do you feel like are getting enough nutrition and lifestyle support to support methylation in a proper way? Your general person I'm talking about here.
That's a great question. I mean, really, by and large, I would say that we're not, unless you're eating with some intentionality towards, gene expression. Even people who have very, very healthy eating patterns, with the knowledge of epinutrients could, could make them better. I mean, we look at the Mediterranean diet, a really well-researched dietary pattern, includes legume and eating, extra virgin olive oil, a little bit less meat, some fatty fish. I mean, lots of fresh vegetables, some fruits, some limited grains in the Mediterranean diet. Actually, they're not limited. They ingest a pretty good amount of grains. So the Mediterranean diet is a healthy eating pattern that's been studied in science quite a bit, and they've certainly looked at biological age in folks following a Mediterranean diet, and they do see bioage reversal with this eating pattern. But our diet has done better. Now, I want to say that the Mediterranean diet research is much more better funded, and they've got large study populations, and we're still building our database, but I can talk about another study we're about to publish. So our study was smaller and we need bigger numbers. However, we are building our intervention brick by brick for DNA methylation. We did much better as compared to the Mediterranean diet on bioage reversal.
You mentioned some new research there. Is this research that you've done and you're about to publish kind of thing?
Yep. Yeah. So our original pilot study was limited to men. And we can talk about why if you want to know. And we just finished we've just written for a publication. In fact, we've just submitted looking at this intervention on women, on middle-aged women. And we saw as good of results, actually a little bit better.
Nice. And why did you start with men?
We started with men because it's a pilot study. So we had 18 people in our study population and then 20 controls because it's expensive. Conducting clinical research is so expensive. So we had to keep our numbers small. Women, and they're middle age. So our population age was was 50 up to 72. Women in this age range are premenopausal, perimenopausal, and postmenopausal. So having such a small population with so many different hormone potentials would have made our data very hard to read. So we decided to limit it to men, but then, now, of course, we're looking at women.
So we've highlighted a couple times.
And they're rocking it.
The age reversal being just over 3 years for the men in the first study. What is it for the women? Can you talk about that?
4.6. 4.6.
That's incredible.
Amazingly enough. I know, it's really incredible. And I would say that I've been following our diet for a long, long time. And, I'm not a teenager. So it's only going to take you back. It's only going to engage in bioage reversal to an extent. You're not going to keep reversing until you're, a toddler. But yeah, the women just really did very, very well.
And when it comes to this age reversal, how does it impact somebody who has generally good health versus somebody who's
that's
sick?
That's an awesome question.
Because I can see how somebody who's sick has a lot more of
room.
Bandwidth there to go. How does your research look at that?
So you're absolutely correct. Your intuition is spot on with this. People who are not well are aging faster, and they're, biologically older than their chronological age. And a good example is diabetes, where depending on the study you look at, they can be anywhere from 6 to 9 years older biologically than their chronological age. So yes, as you reverse diabetes, you would see, a pretty massive drop potential in bioage. It could be a whole 6 years or 9 years, just bringing them back to chronological age. Amazingly enough, we used in both cohorts, so in both studies, our participants were healthy, very, very healthy. Right now, the people most interested in adopting the Younger You program are, what we might call biohackers, or people really in the longevity space. I think the diet is broadly attainable by anyone. So it doesn't have to be the biohackers. They just happen to be interested in it. So in our original study, we limited it to healthy men. Took us a while to recruit, to make sure we were finding people who fit the health goals that we had set. And then in our first cohort of women, all of them were biologically younger at baseline than their chronological age, and then they got biologically younger still. Actually, all of them except for one. One's bio age at start matched her chronological age, but really for the most part, both cohorts are quite healthy.
And the other piece to this too kind of ties in what we're talking about right now is for somebody who is, say, 80 years old versus somebody who's 20 and relatively healthy. Let's say they're both relatively healthy. Somebody who's older, do they have a lot more potential for reversal versus somebody who's younger, or how does that work?
Yeah, I would say that's likely that's likely true. Certainly, that's what I've seen, well, I haven't measured that many 20-year-olds because they're less interested in exploring their bio age, but certainly some of the drops we can see in the healthy older population can be extraordinary. My mentor, Dr. Jeff Bland, and he and I were just at a conference less than a week ago, and he reported his bio age after doing an intervention, and it was he's 78 and his bio age is 57. Pretty amazing. And likewise, somebody in our study population is in his 70s and his bio age was also in his 50s. It's amazing. And actually, in centenarians, there was a research study that just came out looking at French centenarians, and some of them are almost 30 years younger biologically. So yeah, it's pretty extraordinary. So clearly, if you're 20, you just don't, you're not going to be dropping down to, toddlerhood. So the amount of bio age change that's possible is going to be less. But with that said, we can also measure the pace of aging, like how fast we're aging, where one would be aging at the rate of chronological age greater than one is aging fast, and then aging less than one, we're biologically aging at a slower rate than our chronological age. So our toolkit is growing. And I know in younger individuals, you can slow down that rate of aging, perhaps more so than people who are older. So that one tool is able to pick up something different in a youthful population.
When it comes to the two different studies and the diet you used and other lifestyle interventions, what changed from study 1 to study 2? Was there anything from the first study you learned that didn't really make much of a difference and you let it go? Was there certain things in study 2 that you realized you needed to bring in, or how did things evolve?
That's a great question. So our second study wasn't controlled. It was just based in an app that we were building out that we're actually not using right now. We didn't require the participants to limit the supplements that they were taking, whereas we did control that in the first study. We wanted people to get fermented foods in this new cohort. So there was a more leniency in this second cohort. And it's a case review, so it wasn't a randomized control study like our first. It was this is a case series. We're publishing these early cases as a case series, and probably we will continue to do that, a little bit more of a hands-off approach. But we may jump in and have do another control trial. It's really a great question. Like, what might I change? Yeah, I mean, maybe we would have a stricter fasting window, perhaps. I mean, that's very, very impactful, and ours was modest, but I don't even know if we would change that because we really want this broadly adoptable. But that's a good question, and I don't have the answer for you, unfortunately. But let me just say this because it popped into my head as I was pondering. The reason that we want this broadly adoptable is that healthcare spend in both of our countries around the world is insanely, insanely high. And they have crunched the numbers around improving health span, around just slowing biological age. And if we were able to slow it down by a year, the estimated cost savings is 38 trillion, I think, US dollars. If we were able to slow bio-age down by a decade, the cost savings jumps by an order of magnitude. So, $300+ trillion. So just modest improvements in health span and biological age would be wildly beneficial, just wildly beneficial. And our diet and lifestyle kind of suggests that it's possible and it doesn't have to be, too crazy. And that it doesn't require, medications that are just emerging, or it doesn't require anything radical. It can be relatively modest. In fact, in our study, we didn't even require our participants to consume organic food, because had we done that, we would have had to pay for the food and we would have never been able to conduct the study. So some of our participants weren't even consuming organic food, and we still got those results. Of course, we want everybody to be eating the cleanest source food as possible, but it's also heartening that we saw these changes without making that an essential component of the study.
As I hear you talk, a couple things that jump out at me that would be interesting to control for would be vitamin D level in the body. And then we talked about eating fish.
Yeah.
And I think you said
Yep.
before, for the first study at least, it was recommended once a week to have fish. It'd be interesting to put a fish oil supplement on a daily basis into the mix. I think those two supplements, if needed on the vitamin D, would be really powerful for age reversal.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right. I mean, we know vitamin D deficiency accelerates biological age. Multiple studies have demonstrated that. And when you restore vitamin D status, you slow bioage down. I mean, it's as simple as that. So yeah, were any of our study participants D deficient? Certainly that would have worked against them, if they weren't supplementing. Fish oil, in the benefits of fish oil, having sufficient amount, or recruiting for individuals who had, high red blood cell membrane polyunsaturated omega-3s, like people who have enough fish oil in their red blood cell membrane, and having them at the start of our study. It'd be interesting to see, what we found with that population. I mean, it takes a while for you to get the benefit of supplementing with omega-3s, like more than the 8-week study time. So we'd almost want to start people, with enough.
Which highlights the fact that this is only 8 weeks. It'd be interesting to follow this diet and lifestyle for a year and beyond, and then see if there's an exponential change in that age reversal, because in 8 weeks, getting over 3 years in the first study is just incredible. You can only imagine carrying that on for a period of time, what that could do.
It would be interesting to see. I mean, my biological age, I'm 55, and my bio age at my last check was 41. So, I'm not arguing with that.
That's incredible.
Yeah. So what would we see? I don't know. I don't expect that I will go back to my teen years. I don't expect I'm going to go back, and I don't want to. I don't even want to go back to my 20s. But yeah, I want to stay as biologically young as long as I possibly can, for sure. And so, yeah, what could we see in longer time periods? Hopefully we'll be able to study all of that. We have an IRB, so we have approval to continue to research this, and we're just kind of getting our ducks in a row to be able to continue to do it. We're actually still analyzing our original study. We're looking at changes to gene expression beyond biological age. We changed significantly over 8,000 genes in our study group, and we want to explore that and publish on that as well. And then we have another paper that we're working on writing, looking at the pace of aging. So not a biological age, but are you aging too fast, or are you aging slower? And that's something that I'm really interested in publishing on as well. And we're seeing good results there with the pace of aging.
So up until this point, we've talked about foods to support DNA methylation. We've talked about the intermittent fasting piece, the 12 hours on, 12 hours off. The last piece, and I want to get out of food eventually and talk about other lifestyle pieces for this as well, but let's talk about preparation methods, because you can have the best food, you can be eating it within a great eating window and giving your body that time to rest and intermittent fast, in your case for what you did in the study, very gentle. But then you can be frying your food or grilling your food. So let's talk about that piece, how you need to consider how the food is prepared as well.
Yeah. And so, we didn't want to create onerous requirements for our study population. You set yourself up for failure if you make the bar high. And as it was, we had an intervention that was relatively involved because it was multimodal, diet, lifestyle, exercise, et cetera, meditation. So no charred foods. We didn't want people like deep frying their food. So some basic requirements around healthful preparation, but just the most modest requirements. You're right, though. We could recommend poached eggs, and certainly if asked, the nutritionists would suggest that's going to preserve the delicate choline, the methyl-donor that's so important in eggs. We don't want people to boil things to the detriment of any of the nutrients left in their vegetables. But we were pretty laid back with our requirements, and certainly charring anything is going to turn it into a toxin, unfortunately.
Well, I can see why you would have to be laid back given, the number of variables and the number of people. But you mentioned before the fact that it wasn't even organic. That would be another whole layer to put on this as well, especially when it comes to, protein and animal protein and different qualities there when it comes to grass-fed, organic, and not having all the hormones in there. I shouldn't say that's more important. That it's important in that realm plus the vegetable realm as well. So that's another whole layer for exploration, how that would play into this.
It may be, I know, and that would be beyond, unless somebody really wants to give us a generous grant. It's so expensive to conduct these studies. I think I want to say again, it's important that we got the results without requiring those added layers that are not available to everybody. They're just not. Not everybody can get grass-fed, organic beef. And not everybody can get organic food. So it's, for me, to have this be broadly adoptable and really change the healthcare the health trajectory of, the world. It has to be attainable. The intervention has to be attainable to anyone. That said, layer on those interventions, would we see better outcome? That might be, what we were seeing in our first group of women that we're going to publish on. So again, these biohackers that are, adopting this program early on are very sophisticated, and eating really clean source. They're educated. They know about it. They know that they need enough fish, and many of them are taking essential fatty acids and other nutrients. So that could be the difference between why women did better than the men in our study. That I think that's a reasonable proposal.
When it came to the two different studies, were there any vegans or vegetarians in the mix?
No, not in this either group. No, it wasn't in the first group. We didn't allow vegans or vegetarians. In the second group, we just didn't simply have any in that first iteration. We do have a vegan program in the book. So if you want to follow the Younger You program as we studied it, it's different. We created a vegan version in the book, but I haven't studied it yet. So it has to include legume and beans to be able to achieve the protein requirements. It would be great to study. I just haven't studied it yet, but it would be great if we get enough vegans or vegetarians following in the program. It would be, it'd be pretty cool to see how they do.
Yeah, I agree. Well, let's move beyond the food piece. We went deep into that.
Yeah.
Let's talk about, we'll use the studies as our general framework for these different lifestyle factors that you guys controlled in the studies. You've mentioned sleep and stress management, exercise. So let's talk about these one by one and how
Mhm.
they play into age reversal.
Sure. So it turns out, we think about it, people who are interested in sort of functional integrative medicine tend to be aware of methylation and folate and B12, the all important methyl nutrients. But it turns out stuff that has nothing to do with the methylation cycle regulates methylation in a huge, huge way. We'll start with exercise because I think it's so fun to talk about. Um, Exercise is a massive influence on DNA methylation. In fact, it's been argued by scientists that the way exercise exerts its magic, its physiologic magic, is by changing gene expression, so regulating epigenetics, and in particular DNA methylation. Exercise is like a methylation adaptogen extraordinaire. Like if you want to, if you don't like your greens, go out there and run a mile, or go out there and have a, good solid hike or something like that. Exercise is potent, as potent as any of the foods I've just talked about. It will turn on those tumor suppressor genes. So as we age, again, we become less efficient at protecting ourselves from cancer. Tumor suppressor genes are turned off. They're hypermethylated. Exercise turns them right back on. It's amazing. And the older we are, the more efficiently it does it. I mean, that is just so cool to me, how exercise is just essential. It's an essential requirement. People who exercise regularly are biologically younger. Really, it's as simple as that. The good news is that it doesn't take, somebody being a professional athlete to get the benefits of exercise. One exercise event, one exercise experience can change gene expression for the better just once. I think that is so cool. The habit will be more impactful. So you can see sort of a hint towards benefit with, one exercise. But if you develop the habit, you can see this lasting, this far-reaching effect, beneficial effect. There is something such as overexercising. It is published in the literature that people who overexercise, actually specifically in this particular study, it was Polish weightlifters, they were aging at a faster rate. And you can look at other research. You can see mitochondrial damage with overexercise. You can see a handful of negative things happen with exercise. But a good, healthy, balanced exercise habit makes us biologically younger. People who exercise live longer. Some research estimates up to 8 years. It will add on life. So it's not just disease preventing. It's not just protecting us from cancer and heart disease, diabetes, etc. It's tacking years on. Exercise is just incredibly, incredibly, incredibly important. And I want to say one more thing, and then I'll move on to the next. We can hand down information from our exercise habits to our offspring. So those DNA methylation patterns that are established with our exercise habit or lack thereof, that information can be handed down to our offspring.
I think you touched
So
on that with the
cool.
food piece as well, right?
Yes, absolutely. We can hand that down. You can actually have influence across multiple generations. Questions on exercise, or shall I move
Yeah,
on to the
no,
next?
let's stay here for a sec. So we talked about pushing it too far and how it can be a detriment. What is the minimal required dose? You mentioned also doing exercise once is going to be beneficial. But for somebody out there who is, say, going for a walk, for a half an hour walk on a daily basis, is that
Is that
enough?
enough?
Or do we have to get resistance training in there? Do we need to do HIIT workouts, or what is that? Because just like when it comes to diet,
A
there's
huge
such a
range.
huge
Yeah,
range. What would you recommend to people?
good question. So in our study, it was modest. We wanted it to be broadly adaptable again. So we just prescribed a minimum of 30 minutes a day for 5 days a week, hitting a perceived exertion of 60 to 80% of maximum. So 60% of your maximum, you can define that on up to 80%. 60% might be very lightly sweating, still able to hold on a conversation. 80% of max would be, perspiring a little bit more heavily, still able to converse, but, you're clearly breathing heavy. So 60 to 80%, 30-minute minimum, 5 days. So just something really broadly adaptable. And that's what we required in our study. And you pick the exercise, whatever you enjoy. There's research on house cleaning being, bioage changing DNA methylation favorably. It's so funny. I would not pick house cleaning. Let me be clear. But whatever floats your boat, hiking outside, riding a bike, whatever, roller skating, any form of movement, you just need to achieve that 60 to 80%. But in my book, I do talk about resistance training and high intensity interval training. Yeah, we definitely need muscles as we age. We didn't include those. So, talking about your sort of fantasy design, how we might design a second controlled intervention. Yeah, resistance training could certainly be a piece of that. We need muscle mass as we age, period. We really need to maintain our muscles. And if we don't have a lot, we need to build them. And we want to ideally be really, if you get your muscle mass measured, you can look at it in relation to your age group, and you want it to be at the high level. Before I started the promotion of the book, so during writing the book, I developed a good resistance training habit, and had my muscle mass tested for my age group, and it's up in the 90 plus. I think I'm 92nd percentile for my age, and that's where I want to keep it, because it's so important for longevity. Being able to move, being able to get up, like there's being able to sit on the floor and stand. People who are able to do that as we age, you're going to live longer. Grip strength is essential. It's an independent biomarker of longevity, just your grip strength. So we need our muscles, but we also need our cardiovascular health. And I think that the data on high intensity interval training is really great. And we want to be incorporating some of that into our workout as well.
All right. So we've covered the movement piece. Let's go to the other end of the spectrum and talk about sleep. And again, we'll use the framework of the study. What were you telling people when it comes to sleep who were involved in the studies?
We wanted folks to go for 7 to 8 hours, but getting a minimum of 7 hours. And obviously we can't make people sleep well, but we could the nutritionists were the coaches in this study, so they might just brainstorm with them on sleep hygiene tips, which I'm sure you've covered on your podcast. Making sure your room is dark, making sure you can wear eye shades, or the room is cool, making sure your bed and your pillow are comfortable, etc. Limiting screen time. I like to listen to rain. That kind of helps me. That white noise to sleep. Limiting food intake, again, having the gentle intermittent fasting structure. So nothing 3 hours before bed was required of our participants, so that you're not busy trying to digest food. All those sleep hygiene tips, and actually making sure you get to bed on time so that you have the space to sleep 7 hours, and most of us have to get up for a job or have kids that wake us up. And so we have a sort of a hard start time to our day, and making sure if you get in bed early enough, you're going to have, enough runway to actually achieve 7 hours. So just basic sleep hygiene tips for folks. If you're not sleeping well, you're aging. It's really as simple as that. And you're increasing your risk for all of the diseases of aging. That research is out there. It's strong. People who don't sleep well are accelerating their epigenetic age, increasing their risk for cardiometabolic disease, cancer, heart disease, dementia, etc. So sleeping is very, very essential. Interesting animal research on one poor night's sleep altering DNA methylation in the brain, in the central nervous system, in neurons, and changing neuronal growth. So even one bad night of sleep can change DNA methylation in an animal model. Yeah.
I'm glad you brought methylation, and I was going to go there because you mentioned with exercise that is another form of methylation. Like it's basically like a methylation adaptogen. So in this case, you tied sleep in as well. Great. Okay, let's move to the relaxation piece. in today's go, go, go world, a lot of us tend to neglect this and the sleep. Slowing down can be difficult. When it comes to methylation, why is that so important?
Well, it's huge, man. It's extraordinarily important. It's, I was talking to a guy whose research focus is on the stress response. He's really interested in heart rate variability, and he, for him, it's the most important thing. But the science on it, for me, suggests that it very well could be even more important than food. I think the jury will. Yeah, we have to do all of them, but I think we cannot underestimate the impact of stress on aging. So I just want to distinguish between healthy stress. Stress can be an important motivator. It can actually turn on antioxidant systems. Stress can be incredibly beneficial in small, brief bursts. It can motivate us to perform better on an exam, or can kick in systems that help us detox. I mean, there's so a little bout of stress. The stress of an exercise experience is wildly beneficial. It's indisputable. But it's that excessive, relentless stress that so many of us experience, where we're at our desks and we're in a fight or flight response, but we're not moving our bodies. We're sedentary. Sort of the relentless grind of needing to do and go and be. The demands of a poorly controlled career, or just trying to be everything to all people. This toxic stress load that we experience, profoundly in our culture, is demonstrably pro-aging. The clock that we used in our study, 25% of it is influenced by glucocorticoids. So the ultimate stress hormone, cortisol, is very intimately associated with altering the particular clock that we used. So stress is potently pro-aging. In fact, actually, the one thing I was thinking about, I was trying to pull back. Self-talk, negative self-talk can be toxic. It might be motivating in the short term, but in the long term, this habit is very toxic. So there's many ways in which we can experience the toxic influence of stress, and it absolutely is profoundly pro-aging. So, and then when you look at the reverse, when you look at practice meditators or people who do Tai Chi or people who engage in yoga, they're younger. They're biologically younger. You can look at favorable patterns of gene expression, favorable DNA methylation patterns. It's just really interesting and really cool. And again, I want to say that just one meditation effort or yoga experience can favorably start to change gene expression. But those that are practiced at being able to step out of that stress experience are biologically younger and have more favorable DNA methylation patterns and are at lower risk for the chronic diseases of aging.
I feel like the stress piece would be the most difficult for a lot of people because it is so nuanced and subjective compared to like, okay, this is the foods I need to eat, or this many hours of sleep, or I need to move my body. Like, you can break all that down in a more objective way. When it comes to stress and assessing how much stress we're under, I think that's a lot more nuanced and a lot more difficult. Luckily, things like meditation, you can take a certain period of time and say, I'm going to take 10 or 20 minutes. I believe it was the first study you had people take 10 or 20 minutes twice a day. So you can bring a little bit of objectivity to it. Yes. But I still think it's more difficult, so people might struggle with that.
So we didn't insist that our study participants change their lives at all. They didn't have to examine, where they were stressed out and make a difference, but we did bring in the meditation practice. And it does, again, has evidence behind it as reversing biological age, certainly reducing risk of all the diseases of aging. And so that's where you start. You build a resilience to stress by, taking on a meditation practice, or, you could do yoga or Tai Chi. We did, in our study, we used specifically a meditation practice by Herbert Benson, who was a Harvard scientist who studied the benefits of meditation. And we used his very super, super basic, breathing exercise to elicit what they call the relaxation response. So to get into a meditative place. So we had our participants do it for a minimum of 10 minutes twice per day. I would say, though, to your point, in my clinical practice, stress always influences. Stress is always a driver of whatever somebody is presenting with. I don't think I've ever not had stress play some kind of a role in what my patients are coming to see me with. But to your point, it's always the final frontier, that people are actually really willing to tuck in and address. I think we're getting a little bit smarter, a little more appreciative of the toxic influence of excess stress. But yeah, it's always I find it frequently to be the final frontier that somebody sort of says, okay, I'll change my life. And I live just outside of New York City. A lot of people who live in my community commute to New York, which is, it's nuts. I mean, post-COVID, there's more working from home, but, I would have women in my practice who are high-powered in New York City taking the train in every day, which is a good, a 2-hour train ride. And then you get to your office and you come back and you've got kids. It's like relentless. So you're taking, you're a mom at home and taking care of your children. And then you're, just jamming into New York City and living this really intense career world. It was multiple women, just holding the mirror up to that reality and, having a lot of encountering a lot of resistance to making that change, but those who took on trying to make their home life balance saner, transformed their existence. And that might be, if you have to go into New York, that's doing a little of your meditation practice on the train. It's creating an environment that works. Maybe if you can, getting a little bit of childcare when you need it, things like that.
And when it comes to the stress piece and layering on, using your example there, somebody traveling a couple hours, commuting both ways, coming home, taking care of the family, I feel like a lot of this layers on over time.
Yes.
And you build this resilience, and then you can only stop and look at it from afar when it's built up over years.
Yes. You have to hit a
I'm
wall.
not articulating this all that well, but what I'm getting at here is the fact that it happens over a long period of time, I think, a lot of times for people, and then they realize that they're in it up to their neck, and then they have to, slowly work back.
Well, you get sick. That's what happens. You get sick. People show up here with some sort of ailment or multiple ailments, and that's when they begin, the transformation. And even when they're here, as I was saying, many of them will do everything else before they'll look at the stress effect. It could really take a while. So yeah.
I opened up talking about how methylation, for me at least, has been something I've struggled to fully grasp over the years. It's been, something I've understood, and then I come back to it and I'm like, okay, maybe I need to learn about this again and again. I think we've done a good job today breaking it down for people to understand it on a basic level. And what I want to highlight too is the fact that as people have tuned in through our whole conversation, the good news is when you're supporting DNA methylation, it comes back to a lot of the strategies that I've talked about with other guests on the show, these diet and lifestyle habits that people probably didn't realize it was supporting methylation, but they're doing all these good things that they picked up over the years, tuning into things like this that are supporting it secondarily without knowing.
Yes. Yeah, I know. It's really cool. When you look at some of the extraordinary nutrients, the ones that we really think are the rock stars of this program, it's green tea. Green tea has been consumed for time immemorial, or turmeric, a good curry. Again, yeah. Wild mushrooms. I know it's validating being able to look at gene expression and look at epigenetics. We see, what we thought was good actually is in this level, in this really extraordinary, level of gene expression.
When somebody has tuned in and they start adopting some of the things we talked about today, from a subjective perspective, what are they going to begin to notice? Again, your study that you did, the first one was only 8 weeks. So we know these changes happen relatively quickly.
Yeah, really quickly.
But subjectively, what can they expect to feel differently as they start adopting these things? Will energy improve? Will weight loss accentuate? What can they expect?
Yeah. So we noticed in our study participants, now remember, these guys were healthy, so we didn't expect to see dramatic changes in two healthy cohorts. But nonetheless, we did. We dropped cholesterol, we dropped triglycerides, we increased folate without supplements in our study population. There was a trend towards more energy and less anxiety in our study population. Since then, in our new group that we're studying, we see more energy, we see weight loss. We saw some weight loss in our study population, but these guys weren't overweight, so it's almost like if you needed to, maybe you shed a few pounds, but it wasn't, nothing achieved significance because we weren't looking at overweight individuals. We see in our practice people lose weight. We see inflammation quenched. We see antibodies in people who have autoimmune disease. We see those drop. What else do we see? Yes, improved mood, improved, improved resiliency, better immune response, etc. We see a lot of favorable changes. One of the doctors in our practice finds this protocol to be as powerful as a standard elimination diet, which is one of our first line interventions in functional medicine. But she finds the younger you to be as impactful, as broadly impactful as a old school elimination diet, which I think is high praise. I was pretty touched when she said that. So it impacts a lot.
Kara,
And actually, let me say one other really cool thing. I'm sorry, you're just about to wrap up. People who don't tolerate B vitamins, who have methylation defects. So if we go back to looking at some of the genetics, like, the single nucleotide polymorphisms, this diet is just this program, the entire program is really remarkably effective in that population as well. And I talk about, some of those cases in my book. So let me stop there.
Kara, really enjoyed the conversation. Loved your book, Younger You. We're going to link the book up in the show notes. We're going to link up your website, social media, so people can go and check out and keep up with all the research you're doing. You have this way of taking complex science and methylation and beyond and breaking it down in easy to understand. I really appreciate that. And I thank you for coming on the show and doing that for us. And I really appreciate the work you're doing. Thank you.
Oh, it's great to be with you again, Jesse. And it's just really always fun to talk. Thanks for having me.
Now that you're done my conversation with Kara, you're going to want to stick around here and catch my chat with Gabrielle, where you're going to learn even more about extending your life. I'll see you over there.
People say they don't have time. And the reality is, if you don't have time for fitness, then how do you think you're going to have time for sickness? I think that we have a muscle crisis, not an obesity.